Prepare yourself for the political shocks that are about to shake the world. Zelenskyy strikes back at Trump with an emergency meeting at the UN. Mike Johnson spirals into total panic as Republican support collapses, and Fox News faces a blackout right as Trump is hit with a devastating wave of backlash. Stay with me, because you're about to see every detail of these unfolding events that are changing the game right now. Before I reveal these bombshells, subscribe and hit the like button.
Diplomatic war. Zelenskyy calls an emergency UN meeting to confront Trump. Ukraine is once again showing the world the difference between responsible leadership and dangerous improvisation. In Zaporizhia, innocent civilians, including children, face Russian missiles and drone attacks, while Trump, as always, improvises and turns foreign policy into a personal spectacle, treating human lives like disposable pawns. The recently leaked 28-point plan reveals Trump's audacity in trying to force Ukraine into capitulation, handing over strategic territories and limiting the size of its army. Once again, Trump proves that his priorities are ego and political convenience, not the defense of democracy or human rights. While Ukraine's deputy ambassador, Kristina Hivo, defended Ukraine's sovereignty at the UN, the Trump administration was working silently behind the scenes, aligning with Putin and his envoys to dictate a humiliating surrender. There will be no surrender. Our land is not for sale, Hivo declared. And this firmness stands in stark contrast to Trump's lack of vision and constant improvisation, as he appears far more interested in creating quick deals favorable to Russia than in protecting lives or democratic principles. Trump's diplomacy is nothing more than bargaining with aggressors and abandoning allies in distress. Zelenskyy, meanwhile, shows real leadership. He seeks peace, but not at any price. He insists that negotiations must respect sovereignty, self-defense, and territorial integrity. Trump, in contrast, offers a surrender plan that not only humiliates Ukraine, but also undermines international trust in the United States. Trump's decisions once again expose his inability to understand geopolitics and the gravity of the consequences of his actions. He doesn't learn from history. He repeats the same mistakes that have proven disastrous, as with the 1938 Munich Agreement, appeasing the aggressor in hopes of avoiding conflict. The impact of Trump's policies goes beyond Ukraine. In the US, the clean energy sector is suffering devastating cuts. A battery factory in Missouri that would have generated over 1,000 jobs was canceled. An offshore wind project in New Jersey was blocked, raising electricity bills by 21% in 1 year. Trump claims to reduce costs, yet destroys strategic investments and jobs. His actions do nothing to benefit workers or strengthen the economy. They benefit China and harm the environment. These decisions reflect a pattern, prioritizing personal interests and questionable alliances over human lives and a sustainable future. The leaked 28-point plan shows alarmingly how aligned Trump is with the Kremlin's demands. Even Republican allies were shocked. Lindsey Graham and other Republican leaders expressed concern about concessions that amount to handing parts of Ukraine over to Russia. Trump once again ignores historical context, morality, and the well-being of innocent people, while Zelenskyy continues negotiations on realistic terms, ensuring that no territory is lost and that Ukraine remains free to choose its international alignments. The moral is clear: sovereignty, democracy, and human lives come before Trump's whims. As Zelenskyy resists and mobilizes allies to protect his country, Trump dedicates himself to crafting solutions that benefit adversaries and sabotage allies. The contrast is striking. Ukraine represents leadership with responsibility, humanity, and strategy. Trump represents improvisation, selfishness, and total disconnect from democratic values. Every step the president takes shows his inability to protect civilians or strengthen trustworthy partnerships.
This is the difference between governing with principles and governing with vanity.
Moreover, Trump's pressure for total surrender not only undermines Ukraine, but sends a dangerous signal to the international community that the U.S. can be manipulated into favoring authoritarian regimes. This is not diplomacy. It is an open invitation for tyranny to expand. By standing firm, Zelenskyy shows that resistance and ethical leadership are still possible, while Trump delivers a track record of failures that hurt both the U.S. and allies worldwide. The world is watching, and it sees clearly who truly defends democratic values. Ukraine's resistance under Zelenskyy is not just an act of military bravery, it is a clear demonstration of strategic and ethical leadership, something Trump ignores or underestimates. While Deputy Ambassador Hivo denounced at the UN the surrender plan imposed by the U.S. under Trump's command, the world saw the difference between a leader who protects his people and one who prioritizes ego and questionable alliances. Every one of Hivo's words exposed the absurdity of Trump's proposal, which not only compromised Ukrainian sovereignty, but also European security, demonstrating monumental incompetence in American foreign policy. The leaked 28-point plan confirms what many progressive analysts had warned. Trump views diplomacy as a quick bargaining game, disregarding human lives, regional stability, and democratic principles. From attempting to freeze NATO involvement in Ukraine to the formal handover of strategic territories, the plan represented capitulation to the aggressor, not a peace solution. The contrast with Zelensky's posture is enormous. He not only protects his territory and population, but insists on negotiations that respect sovereignty and integrity. True leadership requires courage, ethics, and strategic vision. Meanwhile, the domestic impacts of Trump's decisions in the U.S. are equally disastrous. The shutdown of clean energy projects like the Missouri battery plant and New Jersey offshore wind park shows an administration placing political whims and ideological alliances above jobs, sustainability, and climate action. Increased energy prices, lost jobs, and weakened green industries are the direct consequence of Trump's administrative incompetence, more interested in reviving a nostalgic greatness fantasy than governing responsibly. Zelenskyy, by contrast, demonstrates planning ability and international articulation far superior to Trump's improvisation. By mobilizing allies, engaging European leaders, and exposing the surrender plan globally, he not only protects Ukraine, but strengthens the rules-based international order. Trump, in his quest for quick deals favorable to Russia, undermines exactly what should be strengthened: trustworthy alliances, international credibility, and respect for treaties. Every move from the White House shows a mix of vanity and misinformation that puts allies, civilians, and even America's global reputation at risk. Even Republican allies sounded the alarm. Figures such as Lindsey Graham expressed concern about concessions resembling the infamous appeasement policy of Munich in 1938. The warning is clear: handing over territory under military threat and limiting a nation's self-defense is a dangerous path that encourages future aggressors. Trump, however, insists on pushing the plan as a diplomatic victory, ignoring the fact that true diplomacy requires commitment, ethics, and respect for national sovereignty. Beyond geopolitics, Trump's plan reveals how disconnected U.S. foreign policy is from the real interests of Americans. Every cut to clean energy projects or environmental protections directly harms workers and families, eliminating jobs, raising energy costs, and weakening local economies. Trump's narrative of cost reduction collapses under the facts. He destroys sustainable opportunities while prioritizing easy profits and questionable alliances. While Ukraine stands strong and rallies support, Trump repeats a familiar pattern of failed leadership, improvisation, centralizing decisions around himself, and seeking instant results without considering human or strategic consequences. The contrast could not be clearer. Ukraine protects lives, sovereignty, and democratic values. Trump promotes surrender, chaos, and favors adversaries over allies. Ukrainian resistance is a global example of responsible leadership, while Trump serves as a warning of the dangers of egocentric and unpredictable governance. The 28-point plan also exposes weaknesses within Trump's own foreign policy team. Leaks, surprises, and resignations reveal an administration fragmented, improvised, and without coordination. In contrast, Zelenskyy articulates consistent strategies, maintains international trust, and ensures critical decisions undergo ethical and strategic evaluation, something Trump cannot manage even in his most optimistic speeches. The message is undeniable: improvisation doesn't save lives, planning and ethics do. In the end, the global narrative solidifies around two models of leadership: Zelenskyy, who protects, strategizes, and respects sovereignty, and Trump, who improvises, favors aggressors, and ignores real impacts on human lives and the economy.
Every action by the U.S. president, from clean energy cuts to the surrender plan to Russia, demonstrates an irresponsible and damaging foreign policy. Ukraine proves that resistance and principles can prevail even in the face of military and political threats, while Trump continues to show that governing without ethics, planning, or commitment to democracy has devastating consequences both at home and abroad.
Backstabbed. Republicans turn their backs on Mike Johnson. Understand the betrayal. Mike Johnson, the infamous Republican Speaker of the House, is in a complete state of panic. Doesn't it look like every day he's running through the halls of the Capitol, dodging the press that only wants basic answers? Yesterday, for example, he was desperate, fleeing questions about Donald Trump's absurd call for the hanging execution of Democratic lawmakers who opposed illegal orders from military command. Johnson tries to downplay the gravity of the situation, claiming everything is extremely inappropriate and very dangerous. But there's no hiding the truth. Young American soldiers are being dragged into a dangerous conspiracy, encouraged to disobey lawful orders, while the speaker pretends to be blind and deaf to history itself. Senator Mark Kelly exposed the absurdity of having to deny that Trump wants members of Congress executed. The truth is clear. MAGA Mike and his allies are navigating uncharted waters, playing with the nation's security and their own family's safety. Meanwhile, Trump-aligned Republicans like John Cornyn mock protesters and activists, calling dancing grandmothers and costume demonstrators lunatics, ignoring the seriousness of what's happening. What should be a serious constitutional responsibility has turned into a circus of disinformation and personal attacks. The insanity doesn't stop there. Lindsey Graham and other MAGA senators created a law allowing them to sue the Department of Justice and receive payouts of up to $500,000 every time their phone records are requested. This means millions of dollars flowing to Trump's allies, paid by the taxpayer, while millions of Americans face rising unemployment, loss of health plans, and economic insecurity. It is the embodiment of institutionalized corruption, where the federal government is weaponized to protect the privileged instead of serving the people. Meanwhile, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem funnels millions of public dollars to boost her own political career and that of close allies, illustrating how taxpayer money is diverted to enrich a political elite while ordinary people suffer. Democrats in Congress fight to expose and contain these abuses, denouncing the preferential treatment given to individuals like Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, who receives benefits inside the prison system thanks to Trump's influence. The Trump administration displays moral and institutional collapse. Promises to release Epstein's files turn into a farce, while the president ignores legal subpoenas and protects sexual predators. At the same time, violence and impunity thrive. People pardoned or benefited by Trump commit serious crimes, such as terrorist threats, assault, involuntary manslaughter, kidnapping, and sexual offenses, showing that the law does not apply equally under his government. This pattern reveals an administration that rewards crime while eroding safety and trust in American democracy. The growing disorder within the Republican Party and the MAGA government is not merely political, it is an ethical and moral crisis. Johnson and Trump's allies not only ignore the law, but structure personal benefits and privileges while the population suffers. And the question everyone should be asking is, how long will the MAGA elite manage to manipulate the government and escape accountability? Each decision, each favor, each ignored subpoena constructs a legacy of impunity and corruption that threatens the very core of democracy. As chaos unfolds in the halls of the Capitol, the full extent of irresponsibility among Trump-aligned Republicans becomes increasingly clear. It's not just about financial perks for senators like Lindsey Graham. It's about a culture of impunity that infects the entire political structure. Every favor to allies, every law manipulated for protection, every ignored subpoena creates a dangerous precedent, eroding public confidence in justice and democracy. The American people, meanwhile, continue facing real crises: unemployment, loss of health coverage, cuts in social programs, while MAGA senators grow richer off taxpayer money and promote a narrative of absolute power and legal immunity. It's no surprise that figures like Pete Sessions publicly boast that Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, receives special treatment in minimum security prisons. The Trump administration ignores justice for victims, reinforcing a system that protects predators instead of holding them accountable. This is the essence of MAGA corruption, an elite protecting its own interests and friends while the country pays the price. At the same time, Republican legislators craft laws that allow them to sue the Department of Justice, shielding themselves from any consequences, an inversion of the rule of law, which should protect the many, not the privileged few. Meanwhile, Democrats, led by figures like Jasmine Crockett and Robert Garcia, work tirelessly to expose these practices and hold the government accountable. They denounce the weaponization of the DOJ and the legal system to favor Trump's allies, highlighting the stark contrast between ordinary citizens and the MAGA elite. Each ignored subpoena, each special favor, each million-dollar payout approved by Congress exposes not only incompetence, but a direct attack on America's fundamental democratic principles.
The problem extends to matters of security and historical memory. A simple plaque honoring the officers who protected the Capitol on January 6, 2021, still hasn't been installed. Meanwhile, MAGA Republicans attempt to turn legitimate legal processes into opportunities for personal enrichment, diverting attention from true heroism and the lessons of that critical day. Every imposed obstacle, every delay, every excuse reveals the elite's priority, maintaining power and privilege, even in the face of actions that threaten democracy. And it doesn't end there. The MAGA government also attacks environmentalists, clean energy projects, and indigenous communities, reversing protections and canceling strategic investments in essential sectors. Thousands of clean energy jobs disappear, factories close, offshore wind and solar projects are canceled, and the public pays the price through rising costs and unemployment. While Trump and allies celebrate opening land for fossil fuel exploitation, the country loses opportunities for global leadership in sustainability, innovation, and social justice. This is the MAGA ideological agenda placed above the population's well-being and the planet's future. The pattern is clear. Trump and his allies transform every department, every agency, every law into tools of self-protection, impunity, and personal enrichment. Crime, corruption, manipulation of legal records, favoritism toward accomplices of sexual predators, sabotage of environmental and economic policy. Everything is systematic, and MAGA Mike is the public face of the panic spreading through the Republican Party. The question remains, how long will Americans allow this elite to act with impunity while their safety, rights, and future are at stake? Every decision by MAGA Mike and Trump is not just political, it is morally corrupt, socially harmful, and legally questionable. The American people must understand that today's collapse is not accidental. It is deliberate, systematic, and orchestrated to benefit a few at the expense of the majority. And the consequence is not just the loss of jobs or rights, it is the erosion of trust in essential institutions, in the rule of law, and in democracy itself. In this scenario, responsibility falls on every citizen and every legislator who still cares about justice, equality, and integrity. While MAGA Mike runs through the halls of the Capitol and Trump protects predators and shields himself, the country continues paying the price of chaos, corruption, and impunity. The fight for truth, justice, and accountability has never been more urgent, and critical progressive vigilance is essential to prevent this cycle of abuse from continuing. History is being written before our eyes, and the choice is clear: remain passive or demand accountability from those who should serve the people, not themselves. Every video, every exposure, every investigation is a step toward allowing American democracy to finally recover from the hands of MAGA and the uncontrolled panic of Mike Johnson.
Fatal rejection. The backlash against Trump reaches a critical level, and Fox News is the first victim. As so-called Fox News spirals into full collapse, it becomes increasingly clear that there are no tricks left to rescue Donald Trump. Even the network's own internal polling reveals a truth they're desperately trying to ignore. Trump is the least popular president in modern history. And we're not talking about small fluctuations. The numbers show a downward spiral that looks irreversible. Every time the hosts try to explain the economic crisis, every time they talk about unemployment or GDP growth, it becomes obvious that there is no consistency or credibility. The network that claims to be fair and balanced is in reality in a state of panic. Take Larry Kudlow from Fox Business, for example, who keeps downplaying serious problems with almost comical disdain, claiming affordability is overrated. One simple sentence, yet it exposes the enormous gap between the reality Americans live in and the narrative Trump and his allies try to push. Meanwhile, hosts discuss the unemployment rate rising to 4.44%, but quickly shift their eyes to inflated or manipulated numbers, desperately trying to build a narrative of hope that simply doesn't exist. The Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates unemployment based on population estimates and sample adjustments, but real numbers show that labor force growth is practically stagnant. In other words, the entire "more jobs" narrative is built on a carefully engineered statistical illusion. While Fox and Kudlow get lost in excuses for an economy stuck in the mud, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent tries to blame everything on external factors, like the Schumer government shutdown. In other words, all responsibility for the economic disaster is deflected, while Trump continues pretending there's a golden era that nobody outside his inner circle can see. The arrogance of the statements from Bessent and Kevin Hassett, the National Economic Advisor, only highlights the disconnect between real data and the official propaganda. Sectors like construction, manufacturing, and transportation show no signs of recovery, the exact opposite of what's being announced on national television. And if the economy weren't enough to bring down Trump's facade, the trade policy chaos exposes even deeper cracks. Fox News tries to sell the idea that removing tariffs from basic goods like coffee, fruit, and generic medication is a major victory, when in reality, it's nothing more than a patch on a policy that devastated the wallets of American consumers. The grand promises of beautiful trade deals have been reduced to symbolic gestures, while the population feels the impact of inflation and lack of affordable essentials. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick tries to paint a promising future with factories returning home, but so far, the jobs and actual numbers remained a distant, imaginary promise. The disinformation doesn't stop there. Rick Scott, involved in historic fraud against Medicaid and Medicare, is somehow brought on to validate healthcare and public spending policies. At the same time, Republicans push debates about $500,000 payouts for GOP senators as an example of their total disregard for transparency and ethics. In the middle of economic chaos, we watch the Senate creating laws that protect its own members, while millions of Americans face unemployment, loss of health coverage, and skyrocketing cost of living. The outrage is palpable, and it's just one more sign of how deeply corroded the political system has become under Trump's shadow. To make matters worse, the media loses itself in bizarre distractions. Stories about attacks on boats in the Caribbean, or Trump spraying cologne on foreign leaders in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, fraud, corruption, and mismanagement are ignored or softened, and the narrative of economic success and global leadership is upheld through lies and data manipulation. The public sees through it. They know the promises are empty, that prosperity never came, and that power remains concentrated in the hands of a few while the most vulnerable pay the price. No matter how hard Fox News tries, it cannot escape reality. Every guest, every host, every secretary called on to justify policies or explain the numbers only highlights how fragile Trump's support structure has become. The back and forth between everything is great and we're victims of external forces creates a narrative that no one outside the inner MAGA bubble can believe. Trump's downward spiral, visible in the polls, the economy, and politics, is undeniable. And the public sees it, even when the media tries to hide the truth with lights, microphones, and empty promises. While Republicans continue to rely on data manipulation, fake economic news, and superficial measures, Americans experience the reality of failed leadership on every level: political, economic, and moral. The rising cost of essential goods, persistent unemployment, systemic corruption, and the clear disregard for the public good reveal a government disconnected from the real country. And Fox News, instead of informing the public, has turned itself into a megaphone, trying desperately to save a political figure who who becomes less legitimate by the day.
Even worse, as the first layer of excuses tries to explain Trump's collapse, a second, even more absurd layer emerges. The narrative of an imminent economic recovery is built by secretaries and advisors, talking about a distant future filled with generic promises, while failing to deliver anything concrete now. Howard Lutnick insists factory jobs and industrial growth will come next year, with GDP magically growing 6%. But these promises are made in a reality of slowed growth, higher real unemployment, and declining sectors like construction and transportation. The American people aren't fools. They see that these announcements are superficial distractions designed to calm the public while real chaos continues. The media spectacle intensifies when Bessent and Hassett appear with excuses that border on fantasy. The Schumer shutdown becomes the scapegoat, ignoring the fact that Trump and Republicans control every branch of government. This victim narrative is a MAGA classic. Never take responsibility, always blame others. Meanwhile, real numbers speak loudly. Stagnant GDP, manipulated unemployment rates, and households struggling daily. At the same time, Fox News tries to portray Republican leaders as competent and trustworthy, hiding the historic corruption and fraud linked to them. Rick Scott, for example, is showcased as an authority on healthcare policy, despite making millions from one of the largest Medicare and Medicaid fraud cases in history. The media tries to soften these facts, but they don't disappear. Millions of Americans know the system is broken, that the government favors itself, and that all the talk about affordability is propaganda. While the country faces rising prices, expensive energy, and growing inequality, Trump keeps talking about a non-existent golden era. Tariffs, symbolic trade adjustments, and empty job promises cannot hide the true impact of his policies. Higher costs of living and declining purchasing power. Even when tariffs are removed from basic goods, this is sold as a historic achievement when it should be the bare minimum of a responsible government. This manipulation is part of the show. Create illusions of progress while the structural problems remain untouched. Internationally, the pattern repeats. Attacks in the Caribbean, military operations in Venezuela, trade negotiations, and energy deals are used to distract from domestic failure. Trump and his allies try to portray global leadership, while internally the economy falls apart. Every external crisis becomes a convenient excuse. Meanwhile, Americans know the truth. Nothing is improving. The result is a deeply skeptical population. People know the promised jobs and returning factories never materialize. They know inflation eats their salaries. They know the government and media are manipulating them. They know the economic miracle is a fabrication. Every interview, every press statement, every staged moment becomes harder to believe. The fall of Trump is visible, inevitable, and increasingly undeniable. Even when officials promise 4%, 5%, or 6% GDP growth and high-quality jobs, the public sees the emptiness of these claims. Nobody sees new factories being built, nobody sees better wages, and inflation continues to crush families. The frustration grows, credibility collapses, and Fox News becomes nothing more than a desperate megaphone, amplifying a narrative that no longer convinces. As the show goes on, with Cologne in the Oval Office, rehearsed speeches, and fake affordability talking points, reality stands firm. Trump is in free fall, and the illusion of a golden era is crumbling right before everyone's eyes. Propaganda can only go so far. When the cost of living rises and lives become harder, no amount of spin can cover the truth. Fox News, the secretaries, the advisors, all of them are trapped in a collapsing narrative. The data exposes it, the public feels it, and Trump knows it. The instability of his political future becomes more undeniable every day.